Amanda with Northwest Arkansas Musicians Connection, and we are in the hall. Today I have with me David Starr. Welcome, David.
Thank you.
David is originally from Fayetteville, lives now in Colorado, and we are here to visit today to discuss Hall of Fame things.
Okay.
So tell us a little bit about you, David. I mentioned before you're from Fayetteville.
Right.
How long did you live around town here?
I was born in Fayetteville in the old hospital that is now, I think, part of the VA in 1956. Went to, school here through high school and the bulk of college. So I guess I finally left here for good in 1981. So what was that? However old I was, 24 or whatever. Moved to Aspen, Colorado. Moved back to Little Rock in 85 for about 17 and a half years. Then moved back to Colorado, which is probably where I'll spend the rest of my life. But significant, that early part of your life when you're learning stuff and you're learning who you are and trying to figure out who you are and all that, was here in Fayetteville. And that's where my music career or my love for music started.
Now, see, I was introduced to you at a blues jam at Legacy Blues Lounge,
Yep.
I believe 2013 or 14.
Sounds about right.
And immediately I was taken with you. We had so
Same.
much fun on stage.
We sang well together.
But I don't know much about what brought you into the music scene. What inspired you? Who influenced you?
Well, a lot of people will remember this, and a lot of people will have no clue, but Ben Jack's Guitar Center, which is no longer here, used to be on College Avenue where there's a pet food shop now.
Wow.
Next to, they're near Brahms. You know which one I'm talking
Yeah,
about?
I do.
Okay. Cool little kind of a boutique pet food store. That was Ben Jack's.
Okay.
And originally it was just that furthest north little storefront, so it wasn't very big. When I was about 9 or 10 years old, my older brother Joe, who's 3 years older, started taking guitar lessons there. And I think probably he was taken from Earl Cate because Earl was running the store at the time. In fact, I saw Earl at my mother's funeral in April, and for whatever reason he brought up the idea. He said, "I remember that you walked in that store when you were 9 years old. I remember that." I said, "Wow, really?" I mean, I remember it to the extent a kid can remember stuff. But anyway, I took drum lessons because my brother was going to do this guitar thing, and I thought, I'll do the drums. So my parents let me take drum lessons. I took from a guy named Rusty Myers for 6 months, and I was pretty well convinced I had it figured out. So at the end of 6 months, I said, "Yeah, I got this." What am I, 10? Looking back, I never learned to read music. I didn't study the rudiments and the things you're supposed to learn the way I should have. But to this day, I remember what he taught me, or what I allowed him to teach me, and that got me started. And then within a couple of years, I was getting with local guys my age and trying to put a band together and trying to, even if it was just a guy. I had a friend who was a piano player, and his mom bought him an organ, so we'd get together and just do whatever and pretend it was a band. So from that point on, I've always played music, and there have been cycles in my life and career where I had to do other things and didn't have time for music like I do now, but that's how it all got started.
First gig, was it in Fayetteville?
As I recall, it was at Root Elementary School in 6th grade classroom one evening. There was some reason to have some sort of an event, and myself and 2 or 3 other guys, not even sure I remember who, but I do remember this. We had a song list with about 6 songs on it, and we were going to play this thing. And the red light on this camera reminds me of this. We wrote out our set list in red ink, and then they turned all the lights off, and they had this clip-on light that had a red bulb. Everything on the song list disappeared because red light on red ink is nothing. So that was our first one. But I do remember, if we talk about Fayetteville, the Fayetteville scene, myself and Jeff Green and Hal Capps and Larry Clack, maybe John Sugg. Don't remember the very first formulation. I know Hal and I were together and Jeff. But we played a place called the Workshop, which was an old wood shop where they built cabinets and stuff. And it was down sort of behind Jose's in the library in that general area. And it was an old metal building that had been turned into some sort of a bar. And I was about 13 or 14. And my mom dropped me off there and said, behave. And I did. And we had maybe 12 songs, and we played them over and over all night long. 4-hour gig. It was excruciating. That's my recollection of it. If any of you guys know better, let me know. But it was a long night, and we really didn't know what we were doing.
Did you consider yourself successful?
Absolutely. Yeah,
That
we
was-
were, we were cool. Successful? I don't know. I don't even know if we got paid. Doesn't matter. But we had a good time, and all I know is that, for me, the idea that you could do that and have people pay attention, and just that energy and the rush that generates, still. You know, somebody asked me recently, when are you having the most fun? And I said, when I'm singing, you know, when I'm doing that, that's when I go away wherever I go, and it feels great.
You do. You transcend from the noise that's around and the clinking of the bar glasses and the people talking over you, not paying attention, and you separate from where you're at and in your performance. That's a wonderful feeling. I always said if that little bit of burning nerves right before you go on ever goes away, then you should quit.
Yeah, you ought to have a little of that.
Yeah.
It's nice to be able to control it as time goes on and go, okay, I can funnel that into something positive. I've never had the kind of nerves where I'm debilitated, and I know there are people, very successful people, that are just nauseous before they go on, but I've never had that. But, you know, I worry that I've forgotten my pick or my capo or something. But, yeah.
Tell me what it was like growing up, knowing you were a musician, obviously, at a very young age, with family support, knowing that you were also a musician.
Well, my mom and dad knew the fix was in. When my older brother played, I played. There was gear everywhere. And ultimately, when we lived out on Highway 45, moved out there when I was really young, and they built onto the house at some point, and they just, because we needed more room, the house wasn't big enough, they built a space underneath a bedroom, a spare bedroom, kind of a breezeway, and then a separate little building, and they just built a room purpose-built for us to keep our gear in and rehearse in.
That's a dream.
Well, it is, and looking back, that was a pretty big leap, because as anybody who's ever built a house, it's like, God, you really want to do that? But they saw that we were serious, and looking back, as you want your kids to be self-starters and go out and find their way, maybe being a musician in a bar every night isn't what you want for them, but my brother and I were both going out, finding gigs, keeping a schedule, showing up when we were supposed to, being accountable, and bringing home some kind of money, if it's $100 or $10, whatever. You were going out and at least mimicking responsible behavior, even though there's the other side, which wasn't terribly responsible.
So that work ethic was instilled early on.
Yeah, and I think my dad worried that we'd grow up and end up in bars and never see the light of day. That concerned him because he grew up in the 50s and 60s, and he had friends who were musicians and knew that life and really never got out of that. So there's that side of it where we always wanted to play, but there's this other side where we always had a day job. We always knew this thing over here wasn't as reliable as maybe the day job. So balance,
Absolutely. And let's fast forward a little bit. Let's move on to you moving away from Northwest Arkansas and beginning to experience. I can imagine that here, nestled in our treasured little corner of the world, that family support was great. You're playing gigs. Then you move away from here and you experience an entire new music scene and new music family. What is that like?
Well, first of all, I was terrified to move away from Fayetteville because it's all I'd ever known. but my first wife and I, it was kind of her idea that maybe we ought to see the world a little bit. So her father had some connections in the construction and architecture business in Aspen, Colorado, and we'd been there to ski and stuff with him, and so we went out there, which if you say that today, it would be almost impossible for someone with no connections, no money, no nothing to show up in Aspen and make it work, because it's such an expensive place now. It's prohibitive. It was tough then, but not like it is now. So let's assume it was just on the end of the 70s when things were still very funky and in transition. Wouldn't try it now. But I showed up out there, couldn't get a job doing anything. Nobody would hire me doing anything. I had all but 2 hours of my social work degree, so for all intents and purposes, I had a college diploma. But I couldn't get a job as a dishwasher one time because they said I had no dishwashing experience. Finally got a job at a community college as an administrative assistant there, and that was great. I liked that. It was solid. It was a day job. And then I got a referral to play drums with a local guy who had been gone for about a year but came back, and he had a big name there, Bobby Mason. And Bobby was a local hero, still is. He's not there anymore, but he's still thought of that way. And he said, I need a drummer. I'm putting a new band together. I said, I haven't really played drums in about 4 years. I've been playing guitar. He said, it doesn't matter. We'll get together and we'll play. He said, I've got 4 months worth of gigs, 4 nights a week at this bar. It was a big room. It was a very kind of a famous room there. We didn't rehearse. Showed up the first night. He turned around and said, 1, 4, 5, shuffle an A. Counted it off. And that was it. So during that very first night, right before we started the song, I looked, and there was Billy Gibbons and Kenny Loggins were standing there talking to each other. And I went, wow, this is cool. So during that 4-year period I lived there, I worked every day during the week. I played in bands, both his band, other bands. I played as just a side man. They'd call and I'd go, well, yeah, I can play drums or guitar. What do you need this week? And so I would do that. A lot of pretty nice wedding gigs, good money. But I met a couple of things happened. One is I learned, if I go back to my time in Fayetteville, always in Fayetteville I was in bands, a band where we didn't veer much outside that, and there wasn't a lot of this pickup stuff where, hey, we need a drummer, don't worry about the tunes, just show up, we'll count them off, like I told you. Most of what I had here was an organized thing where we were a very cohesive unit, kind of like the Cake Brothers. That's what we modeled it on, which ain't a bad model. But when I got out there, it was more sideman stuff, and you'd throw a band together for a gig, and everybody kind of knew the songs, and we'd get through it, and it was always fun. But I met a lot of cool people. One night, I'm playing a little bitty bar, not much bigger than this studio. It's packed, it's smoky, because you could still smoke in there then. This guy walking across the room through the smoke, a very nice-looking fella, and he reached his hand out and he said, I'm Dan Fogelberg. And I said, well, it's very nice to meet you. I'm David Starr. And he said, can I play your old Strat? And I said, sure. So he got up and played. One night I was on stage in that very bar with 3 of the guys from the Nitty Gritty Dirt Band, who by the way, I originally met here in '74 at the store where Earl worked. Kenny Edwards, who at the time had been playing with Linda Ronstadt and was playing with Carla Bonoff regularly. Myself, and Sonny Bono of Sonny and Cher fame. So it was this, and we're up there jamming.
No big deal.
And to a kid, that was cool. And what I tried to do early on was shut up and listen and just absorb that stuff. And I watched people who were good band leaders in that time because somebody had to be in charge. And a couple of times they put me up front and said, what are we doing? And I go, okay, let's do Statesboro Blues in A, okay? Count it off. All right. Well, so that little taste of that made me want to get better. And to this day, my mantra is just grow all the time. And, you know, we're all going to die, but at the end I want to go, I was trying, I was working until the very end. I was trying to get better and grow, you know. So, but that experience out there was really, really good. You know, and it was an interesting time because that was when at that period of time, Joe Walsh lived out there, Buffett lived there, Henley lived there, off and on. They all had other places, but Glenn Fry, run into him once in a while out there in the bar. There were people like that around. John Denver, had sake with John Denver one night. Interesting experiences, and I didn't know those people as well as a lot of the locals, but I was able to be around them, and it felt like a place you'd want to be.
Yeah.
So it was cool, but it lasted about 4 years. Then it was time really to get out of that hectic environment, and so we moved back to Little Rock, and that was a good thing too. I played some down there.
When you and I met, it was again a blues jam, and so let's fast forward again that many years to how many times you had put yourself in that position, jam with all these new musicians. I was so green. I had no clue. I had yet at that time competed in the Ozark Blues Society local blues challenge, where we then went on to Memphis and then went back again for the International Women's Blues Challenge, Blues Showcase. But where you said, you realize where you're at and what you're doing, and you pay attention and you strive to get better, and that is where I was at, and I still feel that I'm always like there. I'm always standing on my tippy toes of making myself available for the magic that could happen any minute.
Yeah.
Because you never know who's going to show up. And like the night we met, Leffler called me, said, "Hey, there's a couple boys in town. You need to meet. Get here in 15 minutes." Well, okay, well, I've got to go pull on my dress.
Yeah.
But I was on my way, and meeting you and saying yes to those kind of situations since then has introduced me to some of the neatest people.
I was traveling yesterday to get here, and maybe I was in the airport just for a moment and doing the whole look at stuff on Instagram, and there was a little clip of Ed Sheeran, who I've come to think a lot of because of the way he runs things in his world, and he's very successful. And he was talking about the benefits of failing. And while you weren't talking about failing, it made me think of putting yourself out there. And he was basically saying nowadays everybody gets patted on the back and they get awards and they get all this stuff. Nobody talks about where you really learn is from falling on your face occasionally. Yep. And I can talk about all those great experiences back then, but there were some, I made some pretty big mistakes, and I stumbled around a little bit, and I had to catch myself and catch up with those guys who were ahead of me. But that's how you learn, and if you're not aware and you're not paying attention, you'll miss the lesson. I've been reading Rick Rubin's book and listening to it on audio. A lot of good stuff in there about awareness and just paying attention, being in the moment enough to see, what am I supposed to learn here? Yeah, I just hit a wrong note. So what? Like, I'm the first guy to do that? Go on,
Yeah.
Don't do it again. Try to miss, try not to miss the opportunity.
Ask yourself, is that jazz now?
There you go. Did it work or not? So, yeah. We used to have that saying, if you hit a wrong note, do it twice and call it jazz. Not sure that works, but I'm terrified to put that into practice. I try to hit the right note.
I believe it's open to interpretation.
Yeah. Exactly.
I've got a very dear friend that anytime we spend any time together, we're conditioned outside of a studio environment where we're fortunate to be here. We always are kind of scrolling, and I'm very appreciative of my friend who, when I walk in the door at his house, if I have my phone out in his hand, he immediately stops paying attention to me.
Yeah.
Because he knows that he doesn't have 100% of my attention.
Right.
And in the time that we have together, he's a musician, he's a producer, he's
right.
a wildly talented and deep thinker. Like, I just love him. And he knows how valuable and precious his time is with each person that he spends time with. And so if you're not in that moment and you're not taking advantage of everything you have with that person right. in that moment, then you're missing out.
Well, I think over time as you get older, I'm going to be 67 here this fall. I don't feel old, but that's getting old. Which I've been trying to step back and look at which of my practices, proclivities, habits, whatever you want to call them, which of those things serve me the best, and then get rid of the ones that don't. Because there's some habits and things that, I don't drink anymore. I used to drink. It's been 26 and a half years since I had a drink.
Three and a half.
Good for you. That didn't serve me anymore.
Right.
And by serve me, it didn't move me ahead. It was holding me back. And I saw a lot of people around me either dying, not paying attention, not being fully present. So, yeah, the phone thing is a distraction. Watching stupid stuff for me on TV is a distraction. I watch more news than I should, but yeah. Anyway, at any rate, you hopefully if your goal is to get better all the time, you have to constantly look in the mirror and re-examine, and that's painful sometimes. Visually some mornings it's painful, but it's hard to examine your own practices and habits and say which of those things are working for me, which are not. Because sometimes you're attached to them and you think that's good. I thought of that. It must be good. Well, maybe not.
I agree,
So-
and I like that.
So I'm in a big place right now in my head where I'm working on all that, trying to get better. I'm going next week, Monday through Thursday of next week, to Rodney Crowell's songwriting camp in Nashville
How fun.
with Peter Asher, Bill Payne, Beth Nielsen Chapman, John Hyatt, Rodney Crowell, others I can't fully recall. And I'm going to put myself in what for me is a fairly uncomfortable setting, which is a bunch of people I don't know and a bunch of people that I look up to and whose opinion matters to me. Now, they're not there to judge me. They're there to help me get better, all that whole group of people. And everybody's there to try to, get better and grow. And so I'm both on this, side of the ledger terrified, and on this side really excited to come away with, because as a songwriter, I got a lot of really good ideas, I think, but I just get blocked. I watched or listened, brother, to a Rick Rubin podcast the other day with John Mayer.
Love him.
Well, yeah, and he's a very talented guy, but I've always thought, I didn't know what a thoughtful guy he was, and I guess I really just hadn't paid attention to anything but the tabloids and his guitar playing, which his guitar playing is great. The tabloid thing's stupid, but he's past that. But one of the things he said is, if you've got a songwriting idea and you write it down, drop what you're doing and finish the song. If it takes you all day, if it takes you an hour, if it takes you 3 days. Now, we don't all have that luxury, but I think the message was chase that as far as you can chase it, because I'll write an idea down. I got 2 lines or 4. Write it down and say, man, I'm going to come back to that. And I'm looking in my phone the other day, and I've got something from 3 years ago. Why didn't I do anything with that?
Right.
Because I was busy doing something else, or that was theoretically more important. So his point was, when that comes to you, there's a reason it comes to you. It's top of mind. Chase it, follow it. Even if you write a lousy song, a lousy song's just one line away from being a good song.
Right.
You just go in and change something.
I had, when we were doing the songwriter circles, which you were one of
Yeah.
our first interviews that we did, that developed into That developed into a wonderful series that we continued for about 2.5 years. And the intention behind that for me as an insecure songwriter who didn't know I was a songwriter, but I looked up to and was fascinated by songwriters such as you, Efren White, Jed Clampett, the people that I had immediate access to.
Yeah.
One of my major questions was, when that moment comes on you, where are you at? What do you do to capture it?
Right.
Like, I have found in my own vehicle electric bill envelopes written with highlighter because I was at a red light and it was all I could grab.
Right.
And I would encourage you to go and YouTube John Mayer at Berkeley.
Right.
He has, I think there's 11 episodes, and that is where several years ago, I found that in Rabbit Hole. Several years ago, I found that in Rabbit Hole on the speech that he did at the college that he went to, and that is where I was able to separate the fluff of the pop media from the man, the thinker, the songwriter.
The Rick Rubin podcast is good for a lot of things, and that was one of them. And I was impressed with that, and I'd never followed that part of his career, which shows to go how wrong you can be, and I was. But he put that in perspective, and yesterday I started something when I got on the plane, and I had no Wi-Fi, which was good. This plane didn't have Wi-Fi, so I just opened my notes and started writing. And by the time I got from the Denver airport to Bentonville, I had finished a song. Now, I say finished. It's the form of a song. It's 3 verses and a bridge or something, whatever it is, a chorus. So I have something to work with now.
You built yourself a skeleton.
Yeah, I got a frame of a house, and now I just got to put the siding and the shingles and the roof on. So, but that was a good lesson for me.
So tell me about songwriting now. I know you've been collaborating and working with several different songwriters over the last few years. Can we talk about who you've been fortunate enough to work with?
A few years ago, I've never written much with people. It's kind of this one. These songs are mine. They're precious. I can do it all myself stuff. In my first 3 albums, I did that way. I played everything, and that was satisfying. And it was a time in my life when I needed to do that. And I learned. Part of it was learning the technology, which was rapidly changing at that point. But when I started going down to Nashville to work on stuff and record, I was introduced to some people. Irene Kelly, I already knew Dana Cooper, Doug and Talisha Williams of Wild Ponies. I've been working a little with John Oates, who I knew from fellow people in Aspen. So Wood Newton, who's an Arkansas guy. So one of the things that happened was what really opened up the collaborative thing in a big way for me was reading my grandfather's book. And those of you who are Fayetteville people from a long time ago would remember my grandfather, Fred Starr, who was a teacher, an educator, a columnist, author, legislator. He and my grandmother were both educators. His last book came out in '72. He died kind of suddenly the next year. I finally read the book a few years ago. And I went to my friend Oates and I said, would you read this book and call me? So he read it and he called me. He said, what do you want to do? I said, let's take that book and give it to about 6 or 7 songwriters. Everybody reads it. Then everybody writes songs inspired by it. And he finished my sentence and said, then we do an album from that. And I went, there you go. And I said, and would you produce it? And he said, that's cool. Because he didn't want to spend a lot of time producing, best I can tell. But he said, that's something unique. It's not just making a record to be making a record. No. There's a whole thing there.
Yeah.
So we did the record. We reprinted the book and reissued it. We have a screenplay for a movie written that who knows if that'll ever get done, although we keep going back and trying to get it done. That whole collaborative effort was beyond anything that I could have ever envisioned. And John and I have about 5 co-writes on that, and then there's Dana Cooper and the Wild Ponies, which is Doug and Talisha, Wood Newton, Irene, trying to think if my friend Shelley Ray Corntweed that used to work for me at my guitar store. All those people pitched in and we wrote songs together, and to this date is one of my proudest achievements. Now, here's how life can get in the way. That came out right before the week before the pandemic hit. So we were to be in Barnes & Noble stores, vinyl stores, all over the country, and everything stopped.
No.
So I don't even know where all the product is. I mean, it all went out to these stores and never saw it again. So
here's your chance to plug it. The name of it is?
The name of the album is Beauty and Ruin, that Dana Cooper and I wrote, and then the book is called Of What Was, Nothing Is Left. And it's hard to find because here's something else that I learned during that process. My granddad used to sell his books in local stores, and he'd drive to Tulsa and put it in a bookstore. He'd go to the library and give them a copy. He'd go to War Eagle. He'd go to the county fair, and he'd set up a card table. And he'd have a box of these books, and he'd sign them, and they'd say $2.50, and he'd sell them to people. And it struck me one day, he was doing at age 75, 77 when he died, the same thing we do, which is we put ourselves in front of people, sell a CD off the edge of the stage, no different. But he was chasing that creative connection to the very end.
Wow.
And I just didn't get it at the time. And literally, I didn't get it for a long time until just a couple of 3 years ago. I was on stage and I went, that's what he was doing.
Yeah,
Same thing.
light bulb.
He just wasn't singing. He was just talking to people. He loved stories. He loved connecting with people. And this whole thing is about connection. You know, it's about connecting with an audience. I do a lot of, more than anything now, I do listening room things. I don't play bars with TV sets anymore. And, you know, I've done a little of that in Ireland and stuff. But
That's Ireland.
well, it's fine. But you'd like for people to be sort of paying attention to what you do. Why else am I here? And so when I can look some people in the eye right in the front row, I played in Edinburgh, Scotland the other night. I just got back about 2 weeks ago. Played a little house concert in a small flat in Edinburgh. 35, 36 people in this tiny little place, and standing in the kitchen, sitting in the living room, small room, no PA. That's how small it was. Guitar and me. The most intimate possible thing, and my heart was so full when I got done because of the connection and the stories, because people want to know, generally, they want to know where the song came from, what the inspiration was, you know, what little tap on the shoulder did you get to make that go from nothing to something. Because that's the cool thing about a song or a painting or anything else. At 10 o'clock in the morning it doesn't exist, and at 10:05 it does. It wasn't in the world, and now it is, because you've taken that thought and put it on paper or on canvas or on a page or whatever. So there's a little magic in that, and if you can share that magic with people, I think it's cool.
I'm going to carry that with me. I've, over the last few years, gone through some things that made me step back from music. And that's happened a couple times in my life. I mean, when my dad passed away, I forgot every lyric to every song that was ever written. And then, you know, the last few years, I didn't have a guitar set up in my living room. I didn't have my piano anywhere near me. I had nothing from my musical environment that I had created for myself was represented in my current environment where I lived.
Right.
And that wasn't like me. But I needed that chance to kind of reflect and heal and work on other things and focus on being a mom and getting sober. I mean, that was one of the biggest things. I baked a lot of cakes. You start to realize how much sugar is in all the alcohol whenever you cut it out.
That's all it is.
So you replace it with beautifully decorated cakes. But when we moved to the townhouse right now about 2.5 years ago, I wasn't able to lug the big church piano with me. First of all, they're a free piano until you have to move. And then they're about $300, $400 after you move it and tune it. So I was fortunate enough, someone gifted me a really nice keyboard, and I had it in a case. And one day I was sitting there staring at the guitars.
Not going to play itself.
At the guitars that you have given me. I have 2 of the 3, we auctioned one off. But I put it down because every day I'm walking around and I hear a riff or I hear a little something. And half the time it's someone else's song probably. But is it? So I plugged it in, turned it on, and one day I got out of the shower with a riff in my head, and I just found myself sitting there for 2 hours chasing it.
Right.
Doing what you said. And ever since then, I've left it plugged in. I've left it right there, accessible. Now that I've got a music stand and a pen, and I've created that environment back around me again. And I think there's something to be said for putting yourself back around the like-minded people. I had isolated myself from musicians.
Well,
all of it.
I will say this about music scene and sobriety is a lot of times when I was young, and it's still true sometimes, the making the scene means drinking or using. And so as we get older, we go, I might even make better music if I had it together a little better. Or if I got up before the next guy in the morning and got to work and got some stuff done. So I used to think about, people would say, yes, you see movie stars and musicians say, I took a year off to do this or that. I think, a year? That's forever. Well, a year goes by like that.
Yeah.
You can gain so much in a year like that, and you can lose so much in a lost year. So a year like that, or 2 years, or 3, can benefit you down the road. I have a guitar store, and when people say to me, where do I keep my guitar? Can I keep it on a stand? Well, in Colorado, it's very dry, so you have to humidify more. So I say, yeah, keep it on a stand most of the time, but for a couple of nights a week, keep it in the case with the humidifier. But the whole point is, if it's sitting there calling to you, you're liable to pick it up and come up with some little something that's the kernel of an idea that you can chase again all the way to the end and make a song out of it. So, but all those things are connected. And I think you talk about you're losing a father. Well, that's trauma, and your head's got to get better from that somehow, or not, maybe not better, but just readjust to the world that ain't the same. I lost my mother recently. I haven't been to that house in 4 months because I don't live here. I'm going up there this afternoon. It'll be different.
Yeah.
But she wouldn't want me to stay away forever. She wanted me to play music. I'm back here to play music in Northwest Arkansas this week. So, anyway, all that stuff is relevant. But what you're saying is you took time to look at all that.
I did.
And that's what I was talking about, that whole awareness thing, and going, maybe I need to step back for a little bit. I wasn't gonna perform as much this year as I ended up doing. And what did I do? I said yes to everything.
Yeah.
And it's been a very busy, almost chaotic at times year, because I did some things routing wise that didn't make any sense. Now, while I was going, why did I take this and drive 1,000 miles to do this, or these gigs, I was also able to find the silver lining and say, I met this person, and this person, and next year we'll do it differently and better. And the gig will, the thing for me is fewer gigs, better gigs.
Yes.
Make the money better, make it better where people are paying attention. So again, if there are mistakes and failures, you just got to learn from them. So, and don't pay twice. Just pay once and then go on. Don't.
I like that. I think I need to also take that with me. Don't pay for your mistakes twice.
Well, it's pretty easy to kick yourself over and over again, but I don't. Every time I do that, I look around and everybody else has moved on, and I'm still kicking myself.
Well, I'd like to share with you, since coming back and getting better and getting stronger, we've turned things around. I say we. I've got a couple of business partners that mostly stay in the shadows, and they push me out to the spotlight. They're like, you're used to it, right?
Well, you're
you
good
can do
with
it,
this. You know,
right?
you're
So what we've decided to do is we've done this Hall of Fame project, again, to honor those that have blazed the trails before our current time period. And we're currently looking into who are the active music makers and scene shakers now. But we're also here to take care of musicians.
Mm-hmm.
So the end goal, the end result of all of this is to be able to give back to musicians that are in need. There's a couple of organizations throughout the United States, but there's not enough that provide direct funds for emergency medical care and financial situations for musicians or those in the music industry that maybe had to take some time off from work and had to reformulate their life and figure out what that next step was so that they
Right.
can continue on their music journey. So I do want to say I thank you for your time here today, because
this is-
that your stories are maybe going to help. I know they help me. I know you definitely inspire me as to know I can continue songwriting, and that those silly little thoughts in my head are actual real things, and they're not just silly little thoughts. When you see it go from your head and you watch someone else do it and tell you that you can do it too,
Yeah.
that is everything. So
Well,
thank you.
Yeah, that's those thoughts are your story, you know, and you write it down. Nobody else can do it.
Write
It's yours.
that down.
Yeah.
Thank you, David. I appreciate
Thank you.
you.
Been a pleasure.